Hey plant lovers, welcome back. Today's daylily video isn't going to sound like the last few plant care videos you've watched. And that's on purpose. Every plant care video eventually turns into the same 3 beats. Water it like this. Give it this much sun. Feed it on this schedule. And with daylilies specifically, that formula undersells the plant badly, because daylilies are one of the strangest, most mechanically interesting perennials you can grow. And almost none of what makes them strange ever makes it into a care guide. This plant grows baby clones directly out of its own flower stalks. It has a mystery illness that stumped daylily societies for 70 years. Some varieties are built to open at night instead of during the day. And unlike almost anything else in your garden, you can cross 2 daylilies by hand and grow something from seed that has literally never existed before, in your own backyard, with no lab and no special equipment. That's what today is actually about. 6 things about how this plant is built and how it's used that most gardeners who've grown daylilies for years still don't know. If that sounds more interesting than another watering schedule, hit subscribe, because that's the kind of plant content I want to keep making. Let's get into it. The first thing almost nobody knows about daylilies is that the plant makes free copies of itself, without you doing anything, right on the flower stalk. It's called a proliferation, and it looks exactly like what it is. A miniature daylily, tiny leaves and all, growing directly out of a joint partway up the scape, usually near where a leaf-like bract meets the stem. Not every daylily does this. Some cultivars proliferate constantly, and others almost never do it, and nobody fully controls when it happens. It just shows up some seasons and not others. Here's what makes it worth knowing. That little plantlet is a genetic clone of the parent, identical in every way. And if you catch it while the scape is still green, you can grow it into a full, separate plant for free. The trick is timing. As long as the scape stays green, the proliferation keeps developing, sometimes even growing its own small roots while it's still attached. Once the scape starts browning, the clock is running, because a fully brown scape eventually dies and takes any undeveloped proliferation with it. When you spot one, cut the scape a couple inches above and below the little plantlet. Then either stand that cutting in a glass of water with the water level just touching the base of the plantlet, or pot it directly in a well-draining mix. Within a few weeks, it typically roots on its own. Some cultivars are known among growers as reliable proliferation producers and will throw them nearly every year, while plenty of others in the exact same bed never do it once. And there's no way to guarantee it in advance. You simply have to get in the habit of checking each scape before you cut it down. It sounds like a small thing, but if you're the kind of gardener who likes multiplying plants without spending money, this is the daylily's built-in version of a magic trick, and most people who've grown these plants for a decade have never once gone looking for it. The second thing is how to actually judge whether a daylily is going to be a great performer before you ever see it bloom, and it has nothing to do with the flower color on the tag. It comes down to 2 words that daylily breeders obsess over, and everyday gardeners never check: branching and bud count. Every flower stalk, or scape, produces buds along side branches rather than just at the very top, and a well-branched scape spreads those branches out along its length instead of clustering everything into one crowded knot. Bud count is exactly what it sounds like. The total number of flowers a single scape is capable of producing across its entire bloom run. And because each flower only lasts 1 day, bud count is essentially a direct measure of how many days of color you're going to get off that one stalk. Hybridizers routinely reject beautiful, well-colored seedlings because the bud count comes in too low, often using something around 15 buds per scape as an informal cutoff for a plant worth keeping. A daylily with poor branching and a low bud count might look stunning in a single photo and still give you barely a week and a half of bloom before it's done for the year. While a well-branched plant with a strong bud count can keep producing new flowers for a month or more off the same clump. When you're choosing daylilies, if the description or tag lists a bud count, that single number tells you more about how satisfying the plant will actually be in your yard than the color does. Branching itself also gets classified into rough categories worth recognizing. Top branched means the branches only appear near the very top of the scape, which usually means a shorter, more crowded bloom window. Well-branched starts the branching lower, closer to where the foliage ends, spreading the display out. Low-branched pushes branching down into the foliage itself, which generally means the longest, most staggered bloom period of the three. There's a second number serious growers check alongside bud count, called scape to fan ratio. Essentially, what percentage of the plant's leaf fans actually send up a flower stalk in a given season. A clump where every fan blooms is doing far more work for you than one where only a third of the fans bother, even if the two plants look identical sitting side by side in a nursery pot. The third thing is a genuine mystery, and I mean that literally. Plant scientists still don't have a confirmed answer for it. It's called spring sickness, and it shows up on daylilies just as new growth is emerging after winter. One or two fans in an otherwise healthy clump start growing sideways instead of upright. The leaves come in twisted with ragged brown edges and sometimes holes, and in bad cases, the central leaves rot at the base and pull right out. For decades, the assumption was that freeze-thaw cycles in early spring were the cause, cold snaps hitting tender new growth. Daylily societies that have actually studied this for years say the damage is set in motion before the growth even breaks the surface of the soil, which rules out the popular freeze-thaw explanation. And despite volunteer research groups working on it, nobody has nailed down the actual trigger. Here's the practical part. If it shows up in your garden, don't panic and don't go looking for a treatment, because nothing tested so far reliably prevents or cures it. Most affected fans grow out of it on their own within the season and can even still bloom. Some gardeners just trim the ugliest affected foliage down to the base for appearance while it recovers. It's one of the only true unsolved mysteries left in a plant this thoroughly studied. And knowing it exists means you won't panic and rip out a perfectly good clump the first time you see a fan grow sideways in April. What makes it stranger is that it isn't confined to the coldest regions the way you'd expect if temperature swings were really the trigger. Volunteer researchers tracking it report the same symptoms showing up across a wide span of hardiness zones in gardens with mild winters right alongside gardens that see hard freezes deep into spring, which is part of why the old freeze-thaw explanation keeps failing to hold up under closer observation. The fourth thing is about timing, and it explains something a lot of gardeners notice but never get an explanation for. Why some daylilies seem to still be blooming in the evening when every guide says the flower only lasts one day. Daylilies actually come in three timing types. Diurnal is the standard pattern. The flower opens in the early morning and closes by evening, done in roughly 12 hours. Nocturnal is the opposite. The flower opens in late afternoon or early evening, stays open through the entire night, and closes sometime the next morning or afternoon. And extended bloomers, which can be either diurnal or nocturnal in when they open, are cultivars specifically bred to hold their flower open for at least 16 hours instead of the usual daylight window. If you leave for work before sunrise and get home after dark, a garden full of purely diurnal daylilies means you're missing almost every single bloom in real time. You only ever see yesterday's spent flowers and tomorrow's unopened buds. Planting a mix that includes nocturnal or extended varieties means there are always fresh flowers open when you're actually home to see them, which is a detail plant tags rarely highlight, even though it completely changes whether you get to enjoy what you planted. The fifth thing follows directly from that, because those same nocturnal and extended bloomers are the reason daylilies can work as cut flowers at all, something most people assume is impossible since each bloom only lasts a day. The trick isn't cutting a single open flower. It's cutting an entire scape that's carrying several unopened buds along with one that's already open. Bring it inside, put it in water, and the remaining buds will continue opening in sequence over the following days, right on the cut stem, giving you a small vase that keeps producing new flowers for close to a week instead of one flower that wilts by nightfall. This works best with scapes from extended or nocturnal cultivars, since their longer open window means whatever's blooming on your counter is actually visible for most of the day, rather than closing before you get home. It's a completely different way to think about harvesting daylilies that has nothing to do with drying or preserving, and almost nobody who grows them tries it because the one-day bloom reputation makes people assume cutting is pointless. The sixth thing is the deepest rabbit hole in the entire genus, and it's the reason there are more than 100,000 registered daylily varieties in the world, despite the plant having only been seriously bred for about a century. Daylilies are absurdly easy to hybridize by hand. Take pollen off the stamen of one bloom, the finger-like part standing up in the center of the flower, and touch it to the pistil, the single longer part reaching out past the rest. That's the entire mechanical process. No tools, no lab. If the cross takes, a small seed pod starts swelling at the base of that flower within about 3 days, and over the following weeks, it grows to an inch or two long before it browns and cracks open on its own, at which point the seeds inside are ready to collect and start. Here's the part that makes this genuinely different from every other propagation method on this plant. A proliferation, or a division, is a clone. It's identical to the parent, because it's literally a piece of the same plant. A seed is not. Every seed from a hand-pollinated cross carries a new, unpredictable combination of both parents' genetics, and the plant that grows from it, even from two great-looking parents, will bloom looking like nothing else in either parent's garden. It might be underwhelming. It might, every so often, be something nobody has ever grown before. That unpredictability is exactly what's fueled the daylily hobbyist world for decades. Ordinary gardeners crossing two flowers in their own backyard and waiting 2 or 3 years to see, for the first time anywhere, what that specific combination actually looks like in bloom. The timeline is longer than most people expect starting out. Fresh seed generally needs a cold, damp stratification period, a few weeks in a moist paper towel inside a refrigerator, before it will germinate reliably, mimicking the winter it would naturally experience in the ground. Once seedlings are growing, most won't produce their first flower for 2 full growing seasons, sometimes 3, which is exactly why serious hybridizers say the hard part was never making the cross. It's the patience required to sit on a row of unlabeled seedlings for years before you know whether any of them were worth the wait. Most won't be. That's normal, and it's also why a single genuinely great, garden-worthy seedling out of a whole batch still feels like winning something. Since we're already deep into the mechanics of the flower itself, it's worth knowing the daylily world has an entire vocabulary for what a bloom can look like beyond the classic 6-petaled shape most people picture. A single daylily has 3 petals and 3 sepals, 6 tepals total, and that's the shape you already know. A spider form stretches those segments out dramatically, officially defined as any petal at least 4 times longer than it is wide, giving the flower a narrow, star-like silhouette instead of a round one. A double daylily carries extra layers of petal-like tissue, sometimes as a flower within a flower effect called hose and hose, sometimes as a fuller, ruffled center called a peony type. Unusual form covers petals that twist, pinch, or curl instead of lying flat, and polymerous blooms simply have more than the standard 3 petals and 3 sepals, evenly arranged, so you'll see labels like 4x4 or 5x5 on plants with extra symmetrical segments. A cultivar registered as 2 or more of these traits at once, say a spider with twisted petals, gets called a multiform. None of this changes how you grow the plant, but it changes what you're able to look for when you're choosing daylilies, because a nursery full of plants labeled only by color is hiding an entire second layer of variety that most buyers never learn to ask about. Color itself has its own quiet asterisk. Despite generations of breeding toward every shade imaginable, red, purple, near black, pink, gold, there is still no true blue daylily and no true pure white one, only shades that lean close. And the patterning inside that color range gets its own vocabulary too. An eye is a band of contrasting color around the throat. An edge or picote is a thin line of different color tracing the petal margin. And a watermark is a lighter halo-like zone between the eye and the rest of the petal. Bloom timing gets coded as well. Tags marked EE through VL, extra early through very late, and choosing a spread of season codes across a bed is how experienced growers stretch color from late spring all the way to the first frost instead of getting one concentrated month of bloom and nothing else. A few closing facts worth knowing. Daylily buds and flowers are edible, and in parts of Asia, they're an actual ingredient, sold dried as golden needles and used in soups for their mild, faintly sweet flavor. Daylilies are toxic to cats specifically, capable of causing kidney failure from even a small amount of any part of the plant. Worth knowing if a cat has access to your beds, even though the same plant causes only mild stomach upset in dogs. And if you ever take free proliferations or divisions from someone else's garden, ask whether their stock has been checked for Hemoracalis virus, since it spreads through sap contact, shows no obvious symptoms for years, and quietly limits vigor in every plant it reaches once it's in your soil. One more worth filing away. Deer and rabbits leave daylilies alone far less often than gardening folklore claims. Daylilies get repeated year after year on lists of deer-resistant perennials, but resistant only means less preferred, not avoided outright, and a hungry deer in late winter with nothing else green available will absolutely still eat the emerging fans down to the ground. Treat the reputation as a mild advantage, not a guarantee, especially in a season when other food is scarce. If there's one thing to take from today, it's that daylilies are a far stranger, more mechanically rich plant than the roadside reputation gives them credit for. Most gardeners will grow this plant for 20 years and never once notice a proliferation forming on their own scape. Never check a bud count before buying. Never realize half their blooms are happening while they're at work. And never try crossing 2 flowers by hand just to see what happens. Try one of these 6 things this season. The proliferations or the hand pollination are the easiest place to start. And tell me in the comments which one you're going to try first. Take care of your plants.